This is Bolus Maximus. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Matt. Thanks for tuning in.
This is my first time hosting a podcast. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. Any idea how we're supposed to get people to listen and subscribe to this podcast?
Just by saying it?
Subscribe.
You're tuned in to Bolus Maximus with Brandon and Matt. Don't forget to comment, share, and smash that like button to stay up to date.
All right, welcome back to Bolus Maximus. My name is Matt Taro. I'm co-founder and co-host. Here with me today is Brandon A. Denson. We're very lucky and excited to be joined by two individuals from the T1D Exchange. We've got Dave Walton, CEO, and Charlie, I don't want to say your last name wrong. Say it for me, Charlie. Iacono, the Vice President of Industry Relations and Commercial Partnerships. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Excited to have you on the show today. Tell me, first of all, where are both of you in relationship to where we are in San Diego?
Yeah, so I'm based about half an hour outside of Philadelphia, even though T1D Exchange is kind of headquartered in Boston. I'm based down here.
And I'm about 45 minutes south of Boston.
Right, and true New Englanders and East Coasters. Hope the weather's not too bad for you gentlemen out there. We send you sunshine and happiness here from San Diego. So we're really excited to talk a little bit about the T1D Exchange, the research that your organization has been conducting, some of the new programs that you have in store, and a little bit about yourself, right? We want to give the listeners a chance to hear about who you are. So we'd love to hear a little bit from David and Charlie. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are and where you grew up, and we'll start there.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having us on. Appreciate it, Matt and Brandon. And so I grew up in the Northeast in New Jersey, born in Kansas City, but grew up in most of my life in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Spent 4 years out in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I was diagnosed a little later in life, 24 years old, in the middle of my first year of business school in Philadelphia at Penn. And, I think I knew two people with type 1 diabetes prior to being diagnosed. But then, was fortunate, that my new girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, actually had been a sales rep at Eli Lilly and had sold insulin for a while. So she was familiar with some of it. And I was in a healthcare management program where we had doctors around, and I was able to, kind of ask people some questions and get some advice about how quickly I should go see the clinic about my going to the bathroom 20 times a day and inability to quench my thirst and waking up in the middle of the night and dropping 15 pounds and then my vision getting a little blurry. So, a lot of the telltale symptoms that everyone else had, but that was kind of my entry into it. I've worked in healthcare my whole career. About 2006, I started working in the diabetes field and medical devices. So I have a lot of experience there, but we can talk about that in a bit maybe, but I'll turn it over to Charlie to talk about his background.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's great to be here with both of you today, and I've admired for some time the work that you've been doing. So, Charlie Iacono, VP of Industry Relations and Commercial Partnerships here at T1D Exchange, and diabetes has been a part of my life for just about my entire life. Diagnosed in the early '80s. It's great to share two commonalities with you guys. Matt being in Rhode Island, and Brandon having worked with you at JDRF. Diabetes has always been a part of my life to some degree. And it was really funny, after grad school, I'd never really thought about going into the diabetes space. And I had spent a significant amount of time raising money for various healthcare organizations, health systems, and other institutions of higher ed and faith-based communities. And I had an opportunity one day to kind of do some reflecting. And quite honestly, it wasn't until my son grabbed my Omnipod one night and tugged on it at 2 years old. And I thought to myself, gosh, this is crazy. I've raised all this money for all these wonderful organizations over the years, but I've never done anything for the diabetes community. Hadn't even done a walk, So that year I did my 30th anniversary of having T1D, I did a Tour de Cure ride, got involved in that way, and then kind of fell in love with just the idea. And, it was just by providence that, JDRF New England was hiring a position, and it's never really looked back. Left the chapter after a couple of years, did a stint in higher ed, found it so incredibly boring, jumped right back into diabetes, and was just really fortunate to join T1D Exchange at a time of just incredible growth and new leadership and new vision. And, we're setting the world on fire in that perspective. So it's great to be here with you tonight.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you. And it's okay to call you Dave, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, man, I just resonate with what you just said about your diagnosis. I dropped 15 pounds. I was 16. I was a little younger than you. I dropped 15 pounds in about a week. I was skin and bones, pale white, blurry vision type of stuff. And, I think so many people, especially young men, have a similar diagnosis story where they had these real extreme cases happen to them. And it just sounds like, we hear and talk to so many people that it keeps coming up.
Yeah. Well, Matt, on that point, I play basketball every weekend at my gym, and I saw a guy who's mid-30s, and about a couple of months ago, I saw him for the first time in COVID, and he had lost a bunch of weight. I said, "Wow, well, what are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm eating less. I'm controlling my drinking." And I said, "Oh, good for you. I haven't really done that during COVID." But and then he proceeds to come in about 5 weeks later, and I find out that he was diagnosed with type 1 on New Year's Eve, and but he was previously diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and put on metformin, despite going to the bathroom all the time, couldn't quench his thirst, losing all the weight, tired and what have you, and an A1C of 13.5. You'd think maybe that diagnosis could have been a little better. The number of stories we hear about adults through different channels being diagnosed. We have someone at our company with an A1C of 18 at 22 years old, graduating college, and she was diagnosed with type 2 and put on metformin and sent home. So that's a whole other topic. At some point, my goodness, yeah, it's ridiculous. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, but just it happens all around us, and telltale symptoms not being recognized by people, and that's something that we're probably going to look at some point, how to help with the education around that in some way.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been personally finding out a lot of people in the community, they have been misdiagnosed. And, when you think about it, we just had a chance to speak with a gentleman that is associated with Bolus Maximus. He went 5 years, so I think about that. It's like going 5 years misdiagnosis. So you're shedding weight, constantly urinating, just the quality of life. And, like you said, if you get those labs done, I mean, that should be enough information right there, to let you know. I mean, if you're in the 18, 13, like that's just extremely high as far as the A1C is concerned, So
Brandon, one of the incredible things too, and we talk about the misdiagnosis, and we used to look at this at the chapter, right? And for somebody who's been living this disease for 36 years, every second counts and matters, right? I can't even think about years of just not being proactively able to manage your disease for, the challenges of people overlooking or not digging a little bit deep enough to figure out that maybe it's not type 2, or maybe it is something a little bit more serious than, where so many of my buddies in high school that were diagnosed, Matt, you may experience this. Well, they're going through a lot of changes, right? Men go through a lot of changes in high school. Of course, he's playing 3 sports, he's losing weight, he's bulking up, he's getting sick. It seems like the excuses are just always there. And to your point, Brandon, it's really just on the surface level. There are some labs that you can run, right? And you can figure this out. And in 2021, it's an atrocity that we're still, misdiagnosing or completely missing the diagnosis in some cases. So. Yeah, to Dave's point, we're excited about what the future holds and some of the work that we may be doing in that area.
Yeah, we're going to jump into that in a second, but I think appropriately, I would say that speaking with Steve, like we did, it was amazing to hear what he was personally doing, the effort that he was putting in personally to try to figure out what was happening, and then what the doctors weren't saying or agreeing with or doing. And I can't imagine, and then Steve's you know, at the call him out, he's 40, he's almost 50 now, white male in Orange County. You can't imagine what the experience is like for people of color who go into the hospital and are misdiagnosed and mistreated. And that's something that we try to raise that conversation up to a level of saying, we need to have this, right? This needs to be talked about. The misdiagnosis conversation needs to happen. So we're excited to hear that you guys are doing that.
Maybe medical school should spend a little more time on diabetes than 4
Right.
to 8 hours, right? I hear that constantly from doctors who say that they can't believe how little time is spent. So
We give a lot of respect to the medical community surrounding us and the people that are out there doing the right thing. But for the most part, you hear a lot of horror stories, and it's like, by chance, did you get properly diagnosed? You know, and it's so,
yeah.
I just want to jump in there for what Charlie said. Like, he's absolutely right, man. Every second counts.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I mean?
5 years.
Like, could you know what I mean? Like, you
No.
know how much wear and tear that is on your body, like going through that. I mean, just having a high blood sugar for a few days, you know, just like
Yeah.
feeling of that, like, let alone, you know, going a week or, you know, 6 months to a year. But, you know, it's just we have to, you know, I think, coming from a Black community, I think sometimes it's not taken as serious when we say that we have issues or problems, and it's like, oh, we'll just take this or just do this or just do that, and it's almost like that has become the norm, and we have to kind of change the narrative on what that looks like, because at the end of the day, if you're telling your doctor that you don't feel a certain way, they have to listen, or you got to get rid of them. You have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about research. I'd love to hear from your perspective. We'll jump right into the T1D Exchange and what the company does and what you've done for the community. What is research, right? How can we address what research is if somebody is listening and they don't understand? What is it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, as a non-for-profit research organization that's focused on improving type 1 care and outcomes, you know, one of our big kind of imperatives is to help explain what research is and like the spectrum of what that could be. So a lot of people have in their minds when they hear research, they go, oh, I don't want to have to go in and give blood and give samples and, you know, this, that, and the other. That is one important form of research. There's a lot of these great new treatments that are being studied right now that could delay the onset of type 1, as an example, are because there are people doing that. But there's a whole spectrum, and there's a lot of important research that's literally filling out surveys or doing an interview over a computer or in person. Lots of different ways that, you know, providing your data from your devices so other people can analyze trends and information in it. A lot of different ways that people could get involved with research. So, you know, we have two kind of important angles that we take at T1D Exchange. One is working directly with people with type 1 or their parents, if they're children, with our online registry. And it's essentially a 30-question survey that can be filled out in, you know, 15 minutes as the kind of the initial, that's what we ask people to do to join our registry. And with that information, you know, understanding how long you've had diabetes, who you see most often, what you use to kind of manage your diabetes, that information we can put together with everybody else. So we have, you know, almost 12,000 people with type 1 who have started the process of providing us the information, and, you know, 7,500 or so who've completed that. That information we can like put together and glean insights from it that we just can't do when you're only looking at a few people and a few interesting examples that we talk about. But when you start rolling it up and you see that things are consistent in lots of ways, you start to, you know, find out these things that are only found out through kind of this collection of real world evidence. And so that's a big part of what we do, that working with patients directly. How long
have you been doing that? How long has T1D Exchange been collecting that type of information?
Yeah. So in different forms, T1D Exchange has been gathering information from, you know, people with type 1 and from their providers as well, for almost 10 years. It was formed about 11 years ago, but they started after a couple of years with some of the research. I think, I think it was 2012 where they got some of that initial data. and again, there's some of it getting data from electronic medical records is another way we go about working with diabetes centers. And so we get blinded, like anonymized data from them. We have no idea who people are, but we get information on every single person with type 1 seen at a diabetes center who agrees to work in this thing we call the Quality Improvement Collaborative. It's a group of diabetes centers that are all collaborating with us with a single-minded purpose of trying to improve type 1 care and outcomes and get more people on devices, because the evidence shows that these devices help you with your blood sugar. So CGM and insulin pumps, and now smart pens is something we're getting into. But those are the two different sources, and the way that we go about doing research is generally we have that effort, and then we have the direct to patient, and then we do custom interviews and surveys and focus groups as well, complementing these kind of these two big programs that we conduct.
Yeah, and Matt, Brandon, I would just add into that, Brandon, we used to talk about this all the time at the chapter and after hours when we'd be hanging out. For so long, research has just focused, as I like to call it, the 1 to 3% of the type 1 population, right? People with incredible access to care, strong healthcare coverage, living in areas that have incredible health institutions surrounding them. And the problem is although metrics are showing that progress is occurring in some aspects, like the life expectancy of a male with type 1 diabetes is still 20 years less than his counterpart who doesn't have type 1 diabetes. And that is in both low economic income areas as well as wealthy areas, across the United States. So I always like to say, when I'm talking with industry partners and commercial partners, and even just the overall philanthropic community in the diabetes space, is that we have to bring about a more representative sample of the diabetes community, specifically in type 1, to be able to make sure that all people are represented in research, and that we're not just looking at the efficacy of the Medtronic 670G or the Dexcom G6 or G7 or the Omnipod or the Tandem pump with that 1 to 3% of the population. We need to know how it affects, and if it's a positive sign or if it's a negative sign for the entire community, because we just can't care, and we can't just do research around one subset group of people. And the online registry is so fantastic about that, because Brandon, you and I know in the community outreach and the organizing that you did in the JDRF New England chapter, that various communities have a hard time getting to health centers to participate on site research efforts. But the online registry, you can participate in research from the comfort of your own home. We just launched a study with an incredible cell therapy company that could transformatively change the landscape of care in diabetes. And Brandon, you can take that in San Diego, and the kid in Detroit that can take it, and my college friend who now lives in Mississippi can take it, because they're a part of the registry. And that's what's so fantastic about the registry, is we're broadening that net and that reach. And it's a trusted authority because we are, like Dave said, a nonprofit, and people recognize that we're really striving to improve outcomes. And, Dave, when he first joined T1D Exchange, and I'll kind of build up Dave a little bit here, we took a really hard, long look at our mission and vision, and we crafted new mission and vision statements. And we added in there longer lives, better and longer lives. Because in 2021, it doesn't matter if you're from Detroit or Mississippi or San Diego or Boston, Massachusetts. If you have type 1, you shouldn't be living 20 years less than your counterpart, particularly because you're leaving the challenges that you're leaving behind for your family are felt years after that. That's kids without dads. That's kids without moms. And we've got to change that.
For sure. No, and I'm glad that you hit on that. I want to speak on the importance of participation from males and specifically people of color in research, and why does that matter, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and we've when we first started this this registry, you asked how long it's been around. Well, there was a prior version of it that was done differently that started back in, like I said, 2012, and kind of went through. a few years ago, we made this decision to kind of change and split these efforts of going direct to patients with online survey kind of approach and keeping the electronic medical record data effort and working with providers separate. So it's only been that time we've gotten up these, 12,000 people in a very short time. But the very initial groups, we didn't get as representative as the samples we wanted. So we started doing some things like do focus groups with, people of color to understand, for those who joined, why did you join? And what do you think, you get out of this? And do you have ideas for us how we can do a better job of reaching a more, diverse base? Because we can only reflect insights from the people who contribute the information to us, right? And so we would have the risk of, having something that left out important trends and patterns and insights if we don't get, a more representative group. So recruiting for the registry is not easy because first of all, I would have used a different term if, I could turn back time and not have people call something a registry, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of common folk, right? Like I if you had asked me before, the registry, what's that? Is there a list of everybody? But there are things that we can do to get out and reach to more people. So we have been broadening on the online, influencers who are working with it, and some who, people of color who have, good followings and talk about a lot of relevant topics to try and help with recruiting people into the registry. So, we like to make sure like lots of different voices are talking to people about this. So in case we don't have the message that's tailored perfectly or that resonates as well, for whatever reason, we have other people helping to translate it for us. And so that's important. And we do that with, we have some Hispanic people, a lot of Hispanic followers. We're looking at some organizations like Black Doctors. There's Bridge Clinical Research. I know someone there who they do recruiting into clinical studies, getting people of color into them so that we have representative cases there, right? And so we're trying to talk to them to pick their brains and figure out what can we do better, in that arena. So, I would raise my hand and say we have not solved it perfectly, but we know we have to get more representativeness and keep pushing in that area. And we actually worked with an agency who said they were good at doing this, and unfortunately, it didn't produce the results we wanted. So we stopped that and said, let's go a different route. And I think now we're seeing a little better progress.
Yeah, and Brandon, what's interesting, in working with Dave and my colleague Debbie and her team and Osagi and Wendy and everyone across the organization, we're all so committed to this. And, I know it's one of my passions because I used to say this, early on in my time in diabetes, as somebody who was really excited to join just like you and to change, right? Light the world on fire and fix this because we're living with it and it can be fixed. Whether it's a cure or a new pump or a new CGM, I don't care how great it is unless everyone has access to it, and it changes everyone's life. It makes no difference to me if there's so much on the horizon with what's coming down the pipeline in industry and what smart insulins are going to do for us. And what's so unique about T1D Exchanges is the senior leaders of the organization, and Dave has done a fantastic job about doing this too. Like, we all understand that this is all great and it's all excited, but we've all been sold that song and dance, right? 5 more years, right? Oh, the artificial pancreas is coming. It's going to change your life. But great, right? But if you can't access it, if you don't have coverage to it, or if a certain population is left out of those clinical trials or those observational studies, what's the point of it, right? We're never going to change that needle. And again, I think it takes an organizationally wide commitment. And it starts with the board and it starts with the CEO, and we certainly have that. And industry sees us as the forefront expert in really, obviously, real world evidence, and because they know that we're actively looking to diversify that sample base, and we're excited to do it.
Thank you for that. Now I do want to follow up with this. Where And this may be a tough question. I know it would be tough for me if you ask me. What is more important, the typical research or the clinical research? Because I look at a couple of different things when I look at being able to do clinical research that may be a little bit tougher, but also we're seeing a huge gap still with people being able to like register, like get involved in a registry and things like that. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like looking at underserved areas or areas where maybe they don't have phones, or maybe they don't have access to internet, things like that. So, I think I think you guys are doing a lot of great work, but what would you say as far as like what is more important, like somebody going online and filling out the registry, or actually going into a clinical trial?
Yeah, no, well, first off, you met the mark in terms of a tough question, so good job.
Only one for the night.
Right. I mean, obviously, there are some clinical studies that, not all, but there are some that are extremely important. It's like a new technology, a new treatment. They prove something that gets them out on the market, and it's something that we've been waiting for, right? So I would argue, closed loop systems now where they can automate some of the insulin delivery. That there's a slice of that that's great for a slice of the market, meaning a slice of the universe of people. But you can't, it just can't be one-sided, because there are things and insights that we gather and information that's useful that we find from all the work we do with individuals and directly and filling out surveys, but also things now like we can start to add in some device data. And we're doing a big project with Cgm, but we could do some things with a simple blood glucose meter as well to gather this information, where we pair some of those responses and how people think and feel about certain things, patient reported info that is valuable, and then pair that with some element of data that was tracked with a device or as an outcome measure or something in the, that exists with it. So that's, I'm not really giving you a great answer of one or the other, but I think the worst thing would be if you only did one. You have to have both, right? And so is that weighting, how you do that, I think is pretty subjective, but that there's been a big growth in patient reported outcomes and patient data, patient input. And the FDA is looking for more of that now. We were in a meeting earlier today with an organization that the FDA funds specifically to try and get more patient input into clinical trials and into the consideration set when they're looking at, should some type of device or drug get approved.
Thank you.
It was a hard question. Nice. But Dave, you did a great job, because I feel like it's important for people to understand that if you see an opportunity to get involved in one way or another, you should be making that attempt. You should feel like your voice is worth the effort that you put in to give that feedback. I've never personally done a clinical research study, but I know my colleague here has, as a person of color, he spoke very highly of, it was an important topic in our conversation about the lack of people of color in those research studies. I think what we're seeing now is some of the work that we do is we're working with places around the country that don't, there are older individuals, males, 65 plus, who are white and black, but mostly in the black community, that don't have access to the internet, and they take the bus, and they don't have access to certain things. I would love kudos and congratulations to some of the work that you're doing. We hope to see those individuals be able to participate as well in studies in the future. So that would be something that we'd love to see. And we always at Bolus Maximus, it's just us, but we want to be able to help that initiative and see where we can make a difference.
Matt, the other thing, really, just to add one other thought here is, the narrative about research, I've always thought, I was very lucky as being diagnosed in the early 80s in Southern Rhode Island. It was easier for my parents and I to go to Yale for my pediatric endocrinology, right? So talk about a hub of research. So very early on, I was introduced to that. I thought that that was normal. My sisters were involved in research studies. Like they don't even have type 1. Like it was just, I just thought that that was normal. And then like as my world grew and I became a little bit more older and understood like life existed outside of Southern Rhode Island, I realized that like that wasn't necessarily the case. And like in order to change the narrative or really kind of the challenges that not only the diabetes community is facing, but other disease areas, sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, other disease areas, about trying to figure out like how do we change that narrative. And I think you can do it organically, like you guys are doing, and you're building a brand, but then also too like community health centers. It needs to go beyond the community health center. It needs to go to the community center, right? Like we need to get it in front of people as often and as frequent as possible, because it's a learning curve. And we know with individuals and the members of various communities here in the United States, there are some groups of those communities that are very apprehensive about research altogether. And we know that. We're seeing that with the COVID-19 vaccine, that particularly the African-American community has been hesitant about it. And they have every right to be hesitant about that. So it's our job as nonprofit organizations and Bolus Maximus to change that narrative, to bring better light and better understanding of why exactly it's important. Because it's not just for us to improve our lives, it's for our kids and our grandkids, right?
And I like that because you know, when we look, we can't excuse what happened with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and you know, there's several others that people may not know about, but that is a huge one. But I think we have to, you know, being a Black male, being somebody from the Black community, we have to kind of, if we want to change the narrative, we can't continue to point the finger, you know, and you know, we have to play our part in getting involved, whether it's through a registry, whether it's through actually doing clinical research, getting involved in a trial. And I say that, you know, I've been able to get involved with a clinical trial, and it's just something that I was like, oh yeah, it's just something I just want to do. But I feel like we all have a role to play if we want to help change the community or make an impact. We have to kind of stand on that. We can't just point a finger and say, oh, well, no, they're not doing this. We have to take accountability as well. And like you said, Charlie, I completely understand some people are hesitant, whether it's getting the COVID vaccination, whether it's getting involved in a clinical trial. But I think what we have to understand is by you participating in actually getting involved in any form of research, you could potentially help an entire community, or, you know, or at least advance some things, or maybe some things don't get advanced because they don't work, you know? So yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd point out about the research, you know, so we have our patient registry, and that's a, you know, that's a source of a lot of potential that we can do in the research. But some of the work we do with these, you know, now it's 33 diabetes centers around the country, is pretty remarkable. And, you know, we used that as a springboard last year for this COVID study. And there was a gap in information, and a lot of people were saying, I'm hearing about all these people with diabetes getting COVID and dying or going in the hospital. What's going on? So we launched a study in last April to try and develop some evidence around this. And we got 68 centers to participate. Over 50 of them ended up reporting at least, you know, a few cases of it. And, you know, we've got like, I think almost 800 cases now of people with type 1 who got COVID. And we've characterized through a survey with these centers how people progressed. You know, did they have to go on a ventilator? You know, did they even go to the hospital? You know, how was it? And one of the alarming things that we discovered was that DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, was occurring like 3 times as often in Blacks as it was in whites. And when you peel back the data, you saw that pumps and CGMs were used a lot less frequently, and that really, you know, kind of made this case of we do work in the collaborative to help drive usage of pumps and CGMs. Generally, we have a lot of things that are done there. When you see this data and you go, we have to address that gap. That is, those devices are providing some benefit in blood sugar control. And that's what we found, that the better your blood sugar control was, the fewer problems you had with COVID. You know, it's not a huge surprise, but to see the disparity in the device use, that we know that was a big driver of why we were seeing those poorer results. So Osagie Ebikosian, Dr. Osagie Ebikosian leads our collaborative. He and the team there, they are working on how do we change that at the centers. And he actually on March 2nd is doing leading a lunchtime webinar with a panelist of different clinicians from our collaborative, talking about the things that they're doing specifically to address some of the health inequities that we've seen, in just in the collaborative and outside of it as well. Because some of the centers that gave us COVID data were not in our collaborative. They just wanted to be a part of it and give us data. So it really is we do a lot of different research, but that's where getting the actual data about what's happening, the clinical data, you find some other things that need to go and get addressed.
Yeah, and to Dave's point, right? I mean, saw these questions, right? We're a small, medium-sized nonprofit, very nimble, as I like to describe us, right? And we saw the need, but also the opportunity. And now, so it's crazy that it takes a global pandemic to shine the light on some of these issues, right? That the four of us have probably existed for the entirety of my life of having type 1 diabetes. But now the question that I always ask myself, and I know that we ask ourselves at the senior leader table at T1D Exchanges, what are we going to do as an organization to make sure that we seize this opportunity and carry it on to the next level, right? Because we can't lose the momentum. And Dave and I are talking to a lot of different companies and industry partners about telemedicine, right? And telehealth visits. And do you really need to go to see your endocrinologist 4, 5, 6 times a year? Could you do maybe 2 in-person visits and, do your labs, but then do telehealth check-ins? And again, crazy that it took a global pandemic for us to all realize that telehealth works, right? Yeah. And maybe during the height of flu season, it's probably a good thing that we don't have type 1s or type 2s for that matter going into clinics and possibly getting the flu or COVID-19. And so really continuing on that momentum. And that's, I always like to say to people when they say, what is the best thing about T1D Exchange? What it sets you as an organization apart from others? And I'd say that it's the fact that we are very nimble and we can react to the needs and opportunities of not only the diabetes community, which is represented through the registry, through our online community, but most importantly, in some cases, at that clinic level. Because if we don't start to change things substantially in the clinics, right, we're not going to see long-term care, improve for individuals living with type 1. And, that's the work that Osagie and his team and Dave is leading the charge, on all of these fronts. It's to make sure that we're hitting on all cylinders. And that's why we think it's going to become easier and easier to recruit for the registry, because people will see the outcomes. And we've done some fantastic work from Cgm to some of the early work with leucemia, which was eventually acquired by Lilly, that became Baqsimi, the inhalable glucagon, to other areas that are transforming life with T1D. And I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that life needs to continue to improve on every level with T1D, at every community in that sense.
For sure.
Well done to the team at the T1D. I mean, have a privilege to speak with the two of you today, but to all the individuals who work at T1D Exchange, well done. Because especially it's really good to see a study such as the COVID study that you mentioned, but it's really sad to see the results. And it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. And my position where I am every day, I work at Tandem Diabetes Care, and I've seen some things, and I don't mind saying this. It's hard to see, just to know, talk about that access. We're not standing on the corner handing out pumps, but to know who I'm speaking with on the phone and then who has access versus who doesn't. Looking at some of the studies about CGM usage between the white, Black, and Hispanic groups here in the United States, it's frightening, and the numbers are almost sickening to think about how we just said it before, like a couple days of a high blood sugar, and I'm a miserable person, and I think that
facts.
Truth.
Yeah, but that's like we kind of that we say that jokingly. Think about how many people that don't have access to those tools, as Dave said, like to not have the access, to not have that better quality of life, to not even know that you should at some point turn around and look back and fill out a research study or a questionnaire to help the next generation. Like we have to get further upstream.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's imperative.
So we work very closely with a early stage company, and they're literally rooting for them on every single level for some of the work that they're trying to do. And their CEO is a visionary, right? He, type 1 has been in his family for some time, and he shared with me, and it was an astonishing fact, and it kind of really shook me to my core, Matt and Brandon, and Brandon, when he shared this with me, I immediately thought of you and some of the early conversations that we had when I was recruiting you to leave Detroit to come to New England, and you got to New England. You're like, man, this is not Detroit, and we got a lot of work to do here. And what was so fascinating is he asked me, he said, do you know what the average A1C of an African American youth in Cleveland is? And I had no idea. And he said it's 10.6. That's the average. So think about what on the higher end of that to get to an average of 10.6. And I thought to myself, I said, my gosh, like that's just nuts. Like we've got to start addressing this. And unconscious bias is a real thing. And it's across all disease spaces. And it's wonderful to see leaders like Dave and Aaron and Tom and Tracy Brown from ADA saying like we're not going to tolerate this anymore. We've got to make the steps to begin addressing it now for the community, but also for future generations. And I think to myself, 5 years of a misdiagnosis, like I would give anything to have 5 more years or rewind the clock in my life with T1D 5 years back to get better control of my care. And I'm in good control, right? Like I'm blessed to have access and privilege to those things, but I lose that fight, not every other week. I lose that fight every other hour sometimes with type 1. And for people who don't have that access, the community at large, and when I say the community, I mean nonprofit organizations, I mean the philanthropic community, and I mean industry, they need to come together. Longer lives is the key here, longer and better lives. And that's our vision statement in that sense.
No, and I think you're absolutely correct. I think, sometimes when you take yourself out of the perspective that you live in currently, and, I had to do this myself. I was privileged, I've been pretty privileged, but I also understand after working in the city of Detroit, after working for JDRF in New England, seeing how big of the gap, like it's one thing from like seeing it and hearing it, and then there's a difference when you actually experience it and work in it, so creating change for Bolus Maximus, that's something that we are going to strive and continue to do, just like T1D Exchanges. We want to meet people where they're at, because I honestly, if I didn't have a CGM or if I didn't have an insulin pump, for me out the gate, I wanted an insulin pump and I couldn't get it because they said I had to live with this disease for a year. They wanted me to manage it for a year, which is crazy when I look back 17 years ago. That was the standard. And then now you can be walking out, you could literally in 7 days, you could have an insulin pump or, but I look at it even on a broader scale. When you're diagnosed, no matter your age, no matter your demographic, no matter your race, you need to have a CGM when you leave that hospital, because there's nothing a doctor, an endocrinologist, a nurse, there's nothing that they can tell you that can replace being able to see real-time numbers. And when I say like on an educational standpoint, there's not a lot of education that has to go in with the CGM like a pump does. A CGM is reading your numbers. Like that is simple education that when you leave that hospital, that it needs to be mandatory. And, we need to figure something out. How do we make that? How do we find out how we can make that mandatory for everyone that is newly diagnosed with some form of diabetes, that they have that, because that tool is very crucial.
Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about the Cgm Uptake Project that we did through the Quality Improvement Collaborative just really quickly, and how we changed some of those numbers of patient utilizations?
Yeah. So, I mentioned, briefly before, there were a few things that again, the collaborative meaning, like there are clinicians at, different endocrinologists around the collaborative who work with us, and they, identified some areas that they thought could really move the needle and get better A1Cs, and Cgm uptake was one of those areas. And it's not as just straightforward as you think. Like, we use this improvement science, and they figure out these diagrams and map, what's causing and driving these various issues. And they looked at CGM usage and what are the things we can do to kind of make it more frictionless at these centers. And there are impediments. Like, when you see what happens with certain people getting the product, just from letter of medical necessity to having to deal with some distributor who takes forever to get and loses your paperwork and all of this. And there were things they did on the front end thinking how they could streamline it, but having a CGM navigator role at some of these places, at these centers, to kind of help with the process. They measure it each month, and we get this data, and they were able to get it within, I think, a year or so, from 36% of the people at these centers on CGM to 48%. Like, a pretty big, it may have taken 18 months actually, but it was a big jump. And that it took a systems approach and a lot of work to figure out what are all the little things that are contributing to why we can't get it. Medicaid coverage in some of these states, Texas and Ohio, those were impediments. And so we worked to help provide data showing, look how CGM usage and people are doing better when we have more CGM use. That information was provided to some of the clinicians who were working at the front line there. And, I think they've been able to affect some positive change in the Medicaid coverage in those states. And there are still a lot of states, Medicaid, that do not cover that. And, one of the things we're very excited about is we've been working with the National Minority Equality Foundation, and, they've got some incredible data on Medicaid and Medicare, patients across the country. You can drill down and look at diabetes and all, by zip code and by legislator, and that information can be used to help arm, discussions with people in government or making those decisions. And we're talking about ways we could put our data together to be able to impact change. And we're very excited about the potential of some of the things that we've been talking about with them and their CEO, Gary Puckrin. So it's the CGM one is definitely one that we're tangible, a tangible sign of us being able to work and kind of enable these clinicians who are very motivated and passionate to kind of help them with taking away some of the friction and let them do what they believe is good care.
Yeah. It sounds, already knowing this, and this is part of what we had talked about, David, as you had mentioned earlier, but it sounds like the most important thing for the everyday person living with diabetes to do is to join your registry and fill out the 30 question questionnaire. Like, seriously, like, yeah. It feels like if you don't have an opportunity to reach the legislators, if you don't have an opportunity to join a clinical trial, at the very least, right, the very least you can do is join the registry and start filling out some questions so that you can help provide that information back that ultimately goes into a study that goes back to the Medicaids and Ohio.
And it's a great point, this theme of what can we do to make it easy for people to do the right thing, right? It's what I just talked about with the CGM. What can we do to take away the friction? There are people that would like to get involved in research, but where do you start? Where are you going to go look? And I made this kind of joke to Brandon and some other panelists that we had done a few months ago. You go to clinicaltrials.gov, you're going to go search through, the hundreds of studies that are taking place and like read the protocol and figure out if there's a site near you. No. So what can we do to help spoon feed? Well, one of the benefits of our registry, we have some, information collected on people. We see a study, we talk to an organization about a study they're doing, we can match it. We can say, oh, they're looking for females of this age who live in this geography. Oh, well, we know that we have 420 of people that meet those criteria. So we have a portal that information can get teed up to those individuals. And that's something that we plan on doing a lot more of. We've only done a few studies to date like that, But now we've got the infrastructure in place so we can start serving it up so that we're not asking people to go out and do all this work to find a study that they can get involved. Just please come to the registry and sign up, and then we'll do some of that work for you and serve it up. And you decide if you're willing to participate in something or not. And it could be a paid survey that takes 10 minutes, or it could be an in-person study where you get to try out a new piece of technology that they're recruiting, people with type 1 who have been diagnosed in the last 5 years or that live in this area. So there are a lot of things that go into it. We're certainly looking at, doing our part to kind of make it easier to do the right thing and take away some of that friction.
That's awesome.
And I would only say too, really quickly, Brandon, for those, because I have some family members and some dear friends that have been hesitant to join, right? And what I always say is if you're hesitant to join, like, get to know the organization first too. We have a vibrant online community where we ask a question of the day. We have sponsored articles. We have articles that are being written by people who are living with this disease, that know it, that understand it, that can appreciate it. And it's not reading like a clinical report, right? It's just really just down to the facts and really put in layman's terms. And that's a nice entry point. So I'd say to all of your listeners, if you're hesitant still, after Dave and I have talked about it tonight, and you do your research and you don't know, you can start with the online community, and you can start to see the flavor of what we do every day, and kind of see how the questions of the day are being sponsored by industry and by academic medical research centers, and you can start to build the trust there. I mean, obviously, I'd love you to go in full tilt and join the registry, as Dave and I know the registry team would. But if you need to slowly wade into this space for whatever reason, we respect that. And that's why our online community has more than 28,000 people in it, with more than 12,000 plus actively engaged members. And it's a cohort in and itself, and it's a vibrant community where you can share and exchange and comment on stories and questions. So I always like to throw that out there, because I don't want the person who might have some hesitation to say, well, they don't have anything for me. So that's just another thing to throw out there.
I think that's important too. And at the end of the day, go check out the T1D Exchange. Go check them out. Check out what they're about, and play your part, play your role. Help everybody. You may not think it's helping, but it's helping somebody. Collecting this data is very important, and it brings new change, and it brings advancements to life as far as technology. And like you said, to sustain a longer living life, so
I don't know why we didn't ask this before, but what therapy do you each use? You taking shots? You want to pump? You brought it up before, and I was like, I didn't want to ask it.
I already know my man is on a pod.
Charlie, use the pods, Charlie.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My story, my journey with insulin pumps. As I mentioned earlier, my pediatric endocrinology was done at Yale with Dr. William Tamerlane, and I was an MDI kid, right? And played contact sports all through middle school, high school, and into college. And the pumps just never worked for me, right? I mean, I was tubed. I didn't, I was dealing. I know you have a huge following of men. I was just like, how's this going to affect like my social life? Like, I'm going to start dating. Like, got this thing attached to me. And back then, right, in the early 90s, they weren't as small as they were today, right? These things were bigger than my cell phone. And I mean, I had big cell phones. And so I was always on MDI. And then I always say that I met my wife, and I have 2 boys now. And, at the point that I met my wife, my life changed for type 1. I started taking the disease much more seriously. And when I became a father, it was even more so. But I also recognized that if my boys were going to be anything like me, that if I was tubed up, they'd likely be ripping out my tube. And all the nightmares that we're talking about, my pump failed or this failed, trying to get replacements, I didn't want to deal with that. So I started with the Omnipod. It's transformed my life. It's incredible. I'm also on the Dexcom. Both devices, I think, have probably added years to my life, undoubtedly. But it's everybody's, it's like cars, right? Diabetes technology is like cars. I used to love to drive German automobiles. Now I drive an American pickup truck. Like, you got to figure out what works for you at what point in your life. I'm excited to see what the future holds for Omnipod, but I also recognize that I'm on a first gen Omnipod, and I know my life could be probably better and better managed and better controlled if I just surrendered to the technology and the algorithms. And so we'll see where my journey is a year from now. Dave, I don't know. Yeah.
What are you wearing, David? What?
Yeah, no, I've been on Dexcom since 2008. I worked at Animas, and I kind of I led the launch of the Animas Vibe, which had the Dexcom integrated into it over in Europe. I left before the US one launched, but I was on an Animas pump for a long time. When J&J decided to exit the business, I switched over to Tandem. So I use the Control IQ now with the Tandem, and waking up every morning in the 105 range. I like that. That was one of the top problems I wanted to solve. I believe I can compete with closed loop systems during the day for certain things. At nighttime, hands down, these things are pretty incredible. And I know there are other algorithms and other products that are also helping a lot of people. But I certainly am a big fan of what Tandem and Control IQ do.
Great to have you on the show today, Dave.
Yes.
And we all use what works best for us. And I'm a huge advocate, and I always say, you have to be your own best advocate. So, whatever works best for you, I'll never tell anybody, if they say it works for them, that's great. That's what I like to hear. Whatever helps you extend the life and, take that burden of actually having to mentally and physically deal with diabetes every single day, then hey, my hat goes off to you.
Yeah, and I support.
Yeah, and what you guys were mentioning earlier about how early someone should be given access to some of these devices. It is nice to watch a friend of mine who got diagnosed New Year's Eve, and he already has his Dexcom on, and he's debating what to do. Should he just stick with the injections, or should he go on to a pump? And I remember when those discussions about how early in the process of your progression is post-diagnosis do we think pumps or CGM would ever get to? Because back in the day, you had rules like, show us 90 days of your blood sugars that you test 4 times a day and that you're disciplined enough to wear a pump. And I left one endo because of that.
Or CGM for that matter.
Yeah, and CGM. So, he's learning things during his honeymoon period that are really helpful, like instant reactions to food. Like, wow, that food really caused me to spike. Trying to get that insight with finger sticks just is a lot more difficult. Not to say you can't, but it seems to be a lot easier when you have the continuous data. If we're, let's be honest. So.
Well, and also too, like, not only the data, and I do think it's, we have a lot to learn. I've learned so much having joined T1D Exchange 2 years ago, and just even how to read my own CGM data, and being surrounded by colleagues who are incredibly intelligent and thought leaders in the data space as it relates to type 1 has helped me significantly. But what's also interesting too is I look at like the challenges that diabetes can bring to you, and like to your earlier point, Brandon, like CGM has to be a standard of care, because diabetes type 1 especially strikes at any given moment. I remember on my wedding day, 5 minutes before, my wife was about to walk down the aisle, my CGM was going off, and so I had to correct that, right? Because to Matt, your point earlier, like high blood sugars, you're not in a good mood. And like, if there's one day you want to be in a good mood, it's your wedding day, right? And so like, had I not had that technology, I probably could have felt that. But, I had to correct that. And on the severe hypoglycemic space, particularly with younger kids, or particularly with people who are newly diagnosed or misdiagnosed, there can be serious consequences missing that. In the CGM, I would likely say, for the 4 of us, CGMs have probably saved all of our lives at some point in our journey with this disease. And it's got to become a standard of care. Just in the same sense that glucagon should be a standard of care. you know, I mean, you're diagnosed, you're given insulin, which if you take too much could kill you, but then we are not also writing a prescription that for something that could save you in the event that you make a mistake. Like, it just doesn't add up, right? And
we're fighting to fighting for the things to keep us alive, which absolutely is absurd. You know, it just it baffles me. It makes no sense whatsoever. You know, like
it's like your prescription for insulin runs out. My friend called me the other day. He's like, my script expired and the pharmacy won't fill the script, so I got to call my endo now. Well, how can a script like that expire? Like, I'm sure there are a lot of different reasons why, the payer communities and the practices are the way they are. But insulin to us is like oxygen to everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Life.
Brought that up. That just happened. Literally, my script just expired the other day. I got it taken care of, but it was just, I had to call a couple people. It was just like, dude.
Yeah. Or when they give you the pre-approval for 2 years and you're like, wait, does my health insurance company know that in 2 years I won't need insulin?
Yeah.
So, right, like, to the point, like, what insulin do you use, right? Like, some people like certain insulins, others like the inhalable. It's whatever works for the patient, because the disease is not the same for the 4 of us, let alone the 1.6 million Americans living with it.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, Brandon, one of the things that I was interested in when I first heard about, what you were doing with Bolus Maximus is, just this whole topic of getting kind of men more involved in research. And I would even go a step further, maybe getting men also more involved in just finding out some information online. Because when you look at a lot of different sources, it's very consistent across different disease areas or whatnot. It's women tend to be 55 to 60% or more of the people that are searching the information, that are signing up for things, what have you. And I didn't go on Facebook groups or whatnot until a few months ago. I decided to just start looking at a few of these after being on someone's podcast a few months ago. And I'm amazed at the volume of people coming on and newly diagnosed, and the things I'm learning, struggles people are facing and the frustrations. It's actually been very kind of helpful to reset. But I'm curious, if there's anything that you guys are focusing on or that you've identified as things you want to try and do to get more men involved. I mean, are there any little tricks, or are there areas that you're focusing on that as a way to do that? I'd be, if there's something to talk about.
Excuse me. At the end of the day, I'll say, man, you know what? You guys are always welcome to join the call on Sunday. We host them every Sunday, 3 p.m. PST, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and 11 p.m. UK time. And you can kind of see just what that dynamic in that room is like. So you're not hearing it from us directly. You're hearing it directly from people in the community other than us.
We've definitely, to say that, are we taking action? We've been working on that, behind us over here. There's these big, 3M Post-it notes that are size of posters full of ideas of how to go out and engage. Look out in 2022 and 2023. We want to be on the road. We want to be out in the communities. We want to go find people where they are. And I think that's a really big part of what we see as success. We started as focusing on men because that's what we are, and we didn't have a place to go and talk and be open and not have it recorded and not have a space to say, I just want to talk to another guy like who has diabetes. Let's just kind of just shoot the breeze. And so, it started, 4 years ago now at this point, where Brandon and I started having conversations on the road. I was driving, he's working in Massachusetts. I'd give him a call. We would talk for a couple hours. I was like, cool. This is like, this isn't what men usually do, and kind of air out a bunch of grievances and talk about stuff. Diabetes is hard. We all know how difficult it is. And in one single day, if you want to amass how difficult it is, to imagine 365 times that by how old you are and how many years you have to live. Men don't look at it like that. They live every single day differently. Everybody is different, and they try to do their best to show a strength that we have recognized doesn't need to be shown to everybody. You can show us how vulnerable you are. And so we've done outreach. We're looking at a mentor program. We're very excited about a mentor program, working with some organizations like prevention programs as well. And also looking at the type 2 market, right? It's a way easier for us to look at. So I think that, we have a lot. We would love for you both to join a call. Like we'd just kind of come and hang, for a little while on a Sunday evening and kick it and see what it's all about. But that's something that we've taken a lot of pride in. We've been doing calls now for almost a year. We've had as few as 7 or 8 of us in a room and as many as 65. And so that's really fun for us to get in and do that every week. Different topics, bring in different speakers on different platforms. So before we head out, like I would love to just kind of, Dave just mentioned it about newly diagnosed patients. What would your advice be for a newly diagnosed patient or a group of newly diagnosed patients? Like, what would you say to it? Men or women, children, if they're caregivers or whatever, what would you say to them? What would your advice be to someone newly diagnosed with diabetes?
Yeah. First off, I'd say, look, there's a lot of good information out there. You have to kind of take kind of a little bit of an assertive position, like take control and be your own advocate, like go find out some information, because things may come up, like you may go to an endo who's not very good, or have a non-endo who doesn't know as much. And it's a self-management disease. So, the more you can learn, the better, but learn from other people. Right. And that's what I impressed upon my friend. Like, I can connect you, I can find information I can do whatever, but let other people who've gone through the growing pains or figured it out, fumbled through or whatever, let them help you so you don't have to go through that learning curve. Right. When I walked into Animas and there's like 50 people that have type 1 in the field, and some inside, I'm like, oh my God. And the stuff I learned about how do you wear a pump? Well, how do you deal with a pump and play basketball? There are 3 guys who are like, oh, here's what I do. I wear spandex and tuck it in. Oh, I disconnect. Oh, I do that. But you have to learn from other people, right? There's gonna be so much to learn. And then I would say, I do tell people on the technology side, like, I'm glad you got that CGM early, because that's a great way for you to be able to learn. It's a tool to help reinforce and learn and see these patterns. So I just went through this, and I actually did connect, looked at like, oh, there's a TrialNet study that might be interesting for him for newly diagnosed. So he took a look at it. He's interested. But those are probably the top few things. I mean, there are a lot of others and a lot of questions, and if I'll find somebody that you can kind of connect with and be your little mentor. Like you guys are thinking about mentor. I mean, that is such a valuable thing that I just think it's underutilized. And this isolation that some people feel, that it can be eliminated. There are a lot of people that want to share info. So
yeah, thank you. How about you, Charlie?
And then, I would say, it's funny. I've had this since, as a little kid, right? And some of the best advice that I was ever given was on my first endo visit. And Dr. Tamberlane told me, look, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be okay every day. You're going to fail. And some days you're going to knock it out of the park. And I remember he asked me, he's like, do you like baseball? I said, yeah. And he said, remember, like, you know who Ted Williams is? Yeah, I know who Ted Williams is. He's like, Ted Williams struck out. He struck out a lot. Like, you're never going to be perfect. And like, we can overmanage, we can overanalyze, we can do all these things, but at the end of the day, like, we're just human. And I would say, and I say this to the kids that I've spoken to in support groups, learn, to Dave's point, learn as much as you can, be an information seeker, but also learn from your failures. And I have to be honest with you, when I interviewed and hired Brandon over the phone, like, I had never met him, but he came in for his in-person interview. And I knew I was going to hire him at Junior F. Like, and like, he and I connected, and to your point, Matt, and chatting with Brandon on your calls, like, you have to be able to learn, and you have to learn from others. But most importantly, like, you also have to trust your instincts. Work hard, play hard. Don't let your life run you by the fear of type 1 diabetes. It is a scary disease, but in the end of it, I always say, I don't live with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes kind of tags along with me, because I don't have the luxury to let my boys think that I'm letting this control my life. Right. But I also want to show my boys, Peter's about to be 7, Thomas just turned 5. I introduce them to this disease. I don't want them to be scared of it. because there's a good chance that one of them, or maybe both of them, someday get it. And I want them to realize, like, my dad learned from his experience, became a better man, and became a better advocate for himself and a better advocate for the community, because he cared about all people who are living with T1D and type 2 diabetes for that matter, because I think there's a lot of cross-pollination. So to sum it up, as Dave joked earlier before we got on, right? We could both talk, but my biggest piece of advice is, it's okay when you strike out. It's whether or not you pick up the bat and get back in that batter's box the next day and just keep at it.
And that's huge. And I'll end it with this, man. First and foremost, thank you for giving me opportunity in within JDRF and believing in me. Whatever you saw in me, you saw something, and I'm forever grateful and thankful for the opportunity, regardless of how it ended or it turned out. It's never deterred me from doing what I plan to continue to do and what I'm going to continue to do. And something else that you said that's important. You're not a diabetic. We live with diabetes, and we can do whatever we want to do. Diabetes is just a part of us. We can do anything with diabetes. It doesn't define who we are or what we're capable of doing.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, Brandon, my wife Katie is a huge fan of yours, and she when I said, this was great this time, because I got out of having to put the kids to bed and do the shower thing and that whole process that Dave knows all about with little ones. Sometimes it's hard to wrangle them to get them into bed at the end of the day. But I said, I've got to be on a podcast, and she said, oh, what podcast are you going to be on? I was like, Bolus Maximus, and she said, wow, that's an awesome name. Tell me about it. I was like, well, do you remember Brandon Denson? And she was over the moon excited that you're still in this space, man. So, it was awesome to have that opportunity to work with you at JDRF. And it's just awesome to continue to see you and your network grow to have huge impact in this space. And, we appreciate both of you promoting T1D Exchange, and look forward to hopefully being back on the podcast in the future. And maybe some of our other colleagues can join and talk about some of the important work that they're doing, or even on those Sunday chats. We want to be on the road too, whether it's virtual. And God knows Dave and I probably both feel we actually want to be on the road. We're like, my travel suitcase is packed and ready to go. Like, let's get to work. So thank you for having us tonight.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, we'll keep that in mind. Brandon, we're single men living in our 30s, ready to get into RV and drive everywhere. So that's the type of lifestyle that is not something for everybody. But I think at the end of the day, understanding that meeting people where they are, that's something that T1D Exchange has been doing. So we're going to drop the information for T1D Exchange. It'll be in the bio. It'll be all over the postings that we have and the information of how to get involved. But a strong thank you to the both of you for taking some time. I know you're on the East Coast. It's getting late. You got to tuck yourself in there. The work that you do is tremendous. We appreciate what you've done for the community thus far. For men in the space, and we look forward to having you back on. We'll definitely consider bringing in some more of the individuals from T1D Exchange and kind of expanding that conversation. And we'd love to have you on a Sunday call. So
for sure, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we appreciate it. Thank you. And we'd love to keep it up and bring on a few other people. So looking forward to it. And you guys keep doing what you're doing.
Sounds good. Likewise.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, guys. Be healthy. Stay safe.
Yeah. Have a great night. Take care.
Take care.
Keep it 100. If you don't know, now you know. Bolus Maximus is not sponsored by anybody, but if you would like to get involved or sponsor a podcast,
please reach out to us at thebolusmaximus@gmail.com. That is the THEBOLUSMAXIMUS@gmail, or through our website, bolus, BOLUSM.org. That is www.bolusm.org. We also have an Instagram, Facebook, and a YouTube channel. Please feel free to reach out.